controversial subjects with the facts can be tense, but we are a sub-science here to make things make sense.
By the way, look at our little sign. We finally got it back up. Our little Sidenote sign.
Yeah,
if you're watching the video.
watching it on YouTube, I'm always like, yeah, just trust us. The sign's up.
Okay, so we're talking about the apocalypse. Do you think we, in our lifetime, will face some form of apocalypse?
Well, based on, again, we're going to do another episode more specifically, but based on what I just read in this book called The Next Great Apocalypse by Chris Bagley. Yes. But because the word apocalypse and like catastrophe and like all these concepts that we've created in our heads about what that means is
wrong.
What?
I was just making a joke. Are wrong?
Are probably hyperbolic. They're probably not wrong because they can still happen. But like the way that like we look back on certain types of apocalypses in the past might have felt really, really bad for some people and kind of normal for some people and things like that. Whereas that's happening now for a lot of people.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. And even, as I said, like even for many creatures that are going extinct, like where, it's like the image of an apocalypse that we all suffer something at the exact same time is one version of apocalypse potentially, but there's many other alternate ways that you can like go through an apocalypse.
Exactly.
Scenario.
And I think a lot of like movies are like less interested in nuance because it's more like quote unquote boring. So
well, even think of like the COVID-19 pandemic. It's like in our minds at the beginning, we were like, is this the beginning of an apocalypse?
Yeah.
Because like it could be such a big event if it killed more people and it was like even crazier. And then like, you know what I mean? Like, will this wipe out the human race? I think that's what people often associate with an apocalypse, which obviously is one. It's like the most intense form.
Yes.
But you're sort of suggesting that there are more nuanced ways to talk about it.
Yeah, and you might be like, I think we are going through an apocalypse right now with climate change. I think the amount of change and what is predicted for the future, I think just in our lifetime, we will go through what historians will call an apocalypse, but we might not think that.
Okay, this is based off your book, but I really thought the apocalypse meant like the end of the world.
Well, that's the thing is like, what does that mean? Because when you think about like the Mayan...
Like everyone dying.
Yeah, well, those things, like people who were... Say you're an indigenous person in North America, like...
I see. It's like relative to your position to something.
Yeah.
Like to who? Is it apocalypse just of Earth or of one group of people or of our solar system? Or like you mean like it... So some people might have been like that or what?
Like if you were an indigenous person living in North America before the like devastating effects of colonization, would you not be like, this is an apocalypse to my culture? Because these white people came in and actively tried to kill us with disease, starve us out. And the sheer amount of people that died because of colonization, the numbers, millions and millions of people died. That like to them, they can't think of it anything but that.
Yeah, and
they were dying of disease.
Looking up the definition, and one of them is just any universal or widespread destruction or disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's fair. I think like maybe in religious texts or historical texts, like they predict the apocalypse, which is like the final event. But
I think that's what this book's trying to say. Like that's such a dumb way to look at it.
Yeah, that's like the idea that there's this final thing that takes out everything at once. And
of course, an asteroid would be, chef's kiss apocalypse.
Careful what you wish for. Oh, you mean like just in terms of like
I'm not wishing for that.
Well, you called it chef's kiss.
No, I mean like to give the definition that you're thinking. I was like, well, an asteroid could actually do that real well, obliterate us all.
Yeah. Okay.
And then so it is. We'll talk more about that in another episode about whether we are going to be in one in our lifetime. But I do think that by definition, historically, yes.
Time periods we'll look back on. Time periods we'll look back on.
I think already you can be like, there's so many species dying. Like, it's just not sustainable.
I mean, so then we
point.
did just suffer and are suffering an apocalypse, which is a pandemic then? Would you consider that?
Well, that's like
many people died.
Super interesting. I don't know how I would define that, but I would say that it's a result of something bigger. Like if you think about climate change, we're only going to have more and more pandemics that are going to become more and more devastating. Supply chains, like all the issues we're seeing because of the pandemic, to me are kind of apocalyptic. Like we're all just like, LOL, like there's no corn or like whatever. Like, but that is like when you think about 10 years ago, what an apocalypse would be, you'd be like, oh, you can't access goods because supply chains are falling because of the pandemic, because of loss of life
that.
and
Well, that's interesting. I kind of want to talk about my study then, if that's okay. Because mine is specifically related to like nuclear war or a nuclear apocalypse. And it literally came out yesterday, this in Nature. There was a study that came out. I was reading the review of it, and it was analyzing 6 different war scenarios. And they were ultimately, at the beginning they addressed, of course, like nuclear war would kill people immediately. There'd be fallout from radiation, these things. But what about like the larger impact on the world? Even if it was just 2 small nations having a nuclear war together. So in their example, they were looking at like India and Pakistan. If they had nuclear war, what would the impact of, in particular, soot in the atmosphere be? And how would that impact surface temperatures on Earth? And in these different scenarios, that Pakistan example, you look like so zoned out. Are you all right?
No, I'm like trying to focus.
Oh, okay, sorry. I just like you look like you just.
I was trying to focus. Yeah.
I was like, is this so boring?
No, I'm trying to like think.
Okay, in that example, these numbers aren't relevant to memorize or anything because I am not going to test you after, but that would release about 5 to 47 million tons of soot into the atmosphere based on like their nuclear power.
Wow.
And then in a full out version of that between United States and Russia, that could produce 150 millions of tons of soot into the air. So they were measuring these and how that would impact the rest of the world if like that happened. So even with those, like, I know like India and Pakistan aren't small nations, but in this context, they were talking about them as like small nations. Even if they, using their nuclear weapons, had a war, the soot from burning cities would encircle the planet and cool it by reflecting sunlight back into space. And they predict that this would cause a global crop failure.
Whoa.
And in the worst case scenario, could put 5 billion people on the brink of death from starvation.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? From a small nation. So that's at the like 47 million tons of soot. The global average calorie, like being able to produce, would drop by 50%.
Okay, so I think that would be an apocalypse.
Yeah, for sure. Whereas if it was like United States versus Russia, they predicted that it could be up to
even more.
90% of calories would be wiped off the Earth because like they had said something like the temperature of the Earth could drop from anywhere between like 1 to 16 degrees Celsius on average because this like so much debris for years would be on.
Oh, you can just picture like the right-wing MAGA people like, let's have a nuclear war to stop global warming.
Yeah,
if you're all so mad about it.
Yeah. Interestingly, the nations that are most affected in this study were the ones at the high latitudes. So good luck Canada, good luck England, basically what they said. The study, but weirdly the best nation off, which you think is like at the high latitudes, was Australia. But it was because they would likely, we get cut off from the world if there's like this nuclear war and food chains collapse. But they're able to rely on wheat for food, and wheat is like really good at growing in colder climates. And so that was
the only time I would want to go to Australia. Kidding, Australians, I always make fun of you. I'm just kidding.
So obviously it's interesting because in that small example, it doesn't feel so extreme. Of course, we're like, okay, hopefully we don't have like an all-out nuclear war between like war-hungry countries like the United States and Russia. And of course, we're all putting into context like the world has been trying to minimize nuclear warheads for a long time, but there's still thousands of them.
Yeah, it's like, has it? Like, I guess it has.
It has dramatically dropped.
That's fair,
but a lot of nations still hold nuclear weapons. And so thinking of even a small war between them, like even like looking at Russia and Ukraine, knowing that these wars can break out in parts of the world to us that feel very far away, how that we all need to care. Because that could impact the entire globe's capacity to make food.
Yeah.
And that's just one fallout event, like from that.
I was reading, like, we've talked before about how like developing countries isn't like the best way to put it because like developing to what? Like, what does a developed country really mean? Like Cuba, you have higher literacy rates than America and better healthcare system. Anyways, but using those terms. Oh, the other thing we say is the majority world would be a better way of saying developing nation because like most people are living like that. We are like the minority world who live in Canada and we're just like, oh, let's put on air conditioning. In the developing countries, 80% of people are directly involved in agricultural production, whereas in the U.S., only 1.5% of the population is involved in agricultural production. Wow. So it's like when those things start to fall, it is interesting. It's like Schadenfreude vibes.
Like we don't even have the skill to manage.
These people in these rich countries are like
relying on the labor force of other countries to deal and provide.
So maybe Australia might have a lot of wheat, but it's like they'd all be like, how do we grow it? Like I just feel like they're not gonna be like used to making their agriculture. Like it's like they might be fine, but if the internet's out.
Is that something like not that you think about, but do you think as people, you and I in particular, like we should have developed these skills? Like, is that something on your mind at all?
Well, that's what the camping thing was. It was like, this is cool because in no way were we
like living through an apocalypse.
No, we had all this simulator, like expense, overpriced like a plastic contraptions. We had a water pump to pump our water out of this gorgeous freshwater lake. Like there was a lot of reasons why, but to a lot of people, the skills that we were like utilizing that day, like building a fire to cook food, unique, would be like, oh, you're like prepping, and it's like, no, I'm not prepping for the apocalypse. But there is a world where this becomes helpful. Okay, so I'll start getting into this stuff then.
I do want you to. I just want to say one other thing that like it's just an interesting idea because it's like, should everyone relearn? And by relearn, I mean like, historically, a lot of people knew how to be self-sufficient. Like if we go back hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years, like lots of people had broad general skill to be able to survive, versus now we all sort of specialize and our society has been able to blossom because of specialization. But now it's like you put yourself at risk if there is some extreme world scenario that you don't have skill to like take care of yourself.
Yeah, well,
and that's an amazing and beautiful thing about humanity, that we like work together and rely on each other for those things, and that's allowed humans to expand and, as you know, create the Planet of the Apes, which only just occurred to me last night, like it is the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, so we also were like, well, let's watch this movie, even because we knew we were going to do this podcast based on other things.
And you had heard that the newer
I heard that the
really good.
New versions of Planet of the Apes were good, like for action movies, because I don't love I love action movies when they're good, but they're always just so bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of basic.
Like I like sorry, like all of the world, but the MCU, I'm just like every time I leave the theater, I'm like that wasn't like good enough for me. Children of Men, like best action movie ever made. Like there's standards of action movies that I always think Marvel's gonna hit because it gets like good reviews for some reason. I'm always just like, what the hell? But these ones I'd heard were good, and they did a really good job in the second one, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, as it being a sequel from the first. The first was like a cool movie that was like kind of family funny at first. Like this ape comes into a house, then it becomes like the tonal shift is pretty cool. It becomes like very serious, amazing action climax on like the San Francisco bridge, and it was like really good, well done. This one's later, and there is mention of a respiratory virus in the first one.
It's crazy because in the second one takes over. Right?
Yeah, it starts pretty much talking about like quarantine and
like how the pandemic started.
Yeah, it was like very interesting.
Started to see that like 5 or 6 years ahead of that. Like obviously they were probably researching and talking to specialists and people who study pandemics and epidemics to learn, but because you were all so ignorant of that, if you're not in those fields, to see it almost felt like predicted. Like it was showing like fake news clips of like this part of the world's under lockdown and people are having to go into quarantine.
People are rebelling because they don't want to quarantine.
Yeah, and you're like, whoa, that is really interesting.
But that has a like mass casualty event from the virus where the only people who survive have like quote unquote like genetic adaptability. So like the whole population like wipes out.
Right.
There's very few people left. They have no communication with other parts of the world. And then there's also these like apes that from the first movie are chilling. And then there's all this like sort of interesting talk about like, like surviving an apocalypse, energy sources, stuff like that. It was good. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I have learned is probably not going to happen is that mass population decline.
Like all at once.
Yeah. Like
it's not that it couldn't, but you're right. The probability, it's much more likely like a gradual shift. You mean?
Yeah. Like if climate change becomes what it's predicting to become and like we don't act properly and we don't come together, like a lot of the signs are telling us that we're not necessarily going to handle this very well. When we think about like authoritarianism and like what the world's deciding to do, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a respiratory virus that kills off like 90% of people.
Right.
It means that like things are going to get worse and fall, and maybe we're going to feel like we're living in an apocalypse. But I think what movies like to do is pretend that like everyone dies.
Right.
Because I think it's simpler, and I think it makes for a more compelling narrative.
It's more like fantastical in the sense that it's like really puts you in an extreme scenario.
Yes. And a lot of like people who study this are like, that is not something necessarily that we predict is going to happen.
Yeah, it's way more likely, like as we've seen with the virus, like we just experienced, like it had a major impact, but it's not like it wiped out everyone.
Yeah.
And that changed so much about our world.
Yeah, so then that leads into like what these experts think are the most important skills for surviving, and it's like so interesting because it's not what you think.
Being a YouTuber?
No, it is definitely not in any way, because it involves social skills, and out of all the YouTubers I've met, it's like that's not what you got. But they're like, the most important thing they think is to be like is having adaptability, flexibility, and essentially being able to recognize, like, be a critical
flexibility,
thinker.
like mental flexibility.
Yes.
I was like, okay, gymnast.
Oh my God, no, not like
Gymnast
leg up,
winning.
like ready. Exactly. Like, it's all these things that I was like, oh, I never thought of it like that. I always think about like building a fire, but it's like people who can think critically, quickly, and are adaptable and flexible are going to be the people who will survive in this post-apocalyptic world where likely there will still be lots of people. And one of the most important things will be figuring out who is like the effective like leaders, and being able to also have a skill, like what you were saying before, like, do we all need to learn these things? Being able to bring something to the table to like be of value in like whatever setting that you're in.
I see. So you're not like in this scenario, specialists aren't as useful.
Exactly. Because, for example, the adaptability, flexibility idea is like, you could show up, and if you have like great social skills and you're like down, people can teach you, be like, we need that. If you're an effective
what does the group need
follower
right now,
and then you're like, you can make yourself an asset to a group. Again, it's a group. A lot of people picture like being alone in the woods, but like, no, it's going to likely be a group of people, and being able to critically also assess who should be leading, because like what happens, and maybe it's what's happening to our world, the people who we're like allowing to lead are actually like maybe like megalomaniacs, or even like maybe the most attractive person. Maybe we're like still stuck in the patriarchy and we're like, it should be a man. Like these things, like that's not going to necessarily like help you in the future. And another cool thing was the 40-70 rule, where they said you need to get at least 40% of the information to make a decision, like in these times of strife.
Okay.
But any more than waiting for like more than 70% of the information, like if you're someone who's like trying to be meticulous, can sometimes
100% of the facts before I make decisions.
Can sometimes lead to like waiting too long. Like a lot of the time, these decisions you're going to make in like dire moments will need to be quick. So it's like, if you're someone who can fall within the 40 to 70% and make effective decisions
based
very quickly.
Partial information.
Yeah, like depending on like what situation you're in. Like, this sounds so vague, but it's kind of interesting.
That makes sense. I'm laughing because I'm like for sure dead.
Oh, because you're like 90 to 100.
I actually need 99%.
Yeah, no,
before
I know. I was thinking
action.
about you. I was like, no, but you might like learn. Like,
that's true. No,
or it's a good thing to know. You know that.
I actually do think I'm a fairly adaptable person, but I don't think I'm a good leader. So I think like in that kind of scenario, I would have to just like put my trust in someone else to make those decisions, because when I'm forced to make decisions, I get wrapped up.
But that's why it's good to know. It's good to know like 40-70 rule, like even just to, if like you're in the post-apocalyptic world, you go, okay, I can't.
Perfect is the enemy of good, right? Is that what the saying is?
Isn't like perfect is the enemy of what?
Isn't it? Yeah, because if you're trying too hard to be perfect, you'll never you'll get obsessed with that.
I don't know if it's good.
Good enough.
Good enough. Perfect is the enemy. Good enough. Move on. Well, let's just do it. And the other most important aspect of surviving in these situations is the will to survive. This is before we get into like the fires and the body temperature. We'll talk about it. But I was like, that's interesting. The will to survive. Because like,
that's like one of the most key. You're saying, sorry, the will to survive is a key component to surviving.
Yes, because if you think about it, like if you're maybe not feeling like there's any point, or you think
like, you need a motivation
to do the 40-70 to be adaptable, to be flexible. Like I just we can't fathom that right now, but I bet it's just an interesting thing to think about. Like, why are you even living if it gets that bad?
Yeah. And for a lot of people that in hard situations, that's their kids, that's their family. Like there's these motivations.
Yeah.
Even, there's like so many anecdotal stories of when one grandparent dies, the other one is suddenly like much
The Notebook.
more ill. Yeah. Or I just like... A lot of people like lose that will to live and then they do die.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Or if they have a specific
There's something so romantic about that. I love the idea.
I'm not
of just
doing that
being
for you,
like,
by the way.
Yeah, no offense, wouldn't do it for you. But like, there's something I love about like being in my hospital bed, or maybe even at home, getting my feet rubbed by someone I love. Maybe it's you, but maybe you're dead. And just being like, you know what?
Maybe I'm dead. When is this?
I don't know. I'm just the idea of like mentally being like, nah, it's time.
Oh, like
and
being
then
able
like
to choose, and then your body,
like
you're just
like
oh,
turning it off. Like that to me seems way cooler than being like, oh my god,
like suffering.
Yeah. So
I'd way rather be like, I choose.
Yeah, like I choose to die. I choose to the big D. Wow, that's a big D that I don't.
It's the biggest D.
It's the biggest D, and it's not good. So the first thing that you need to do once you have all those things, like your adaptable, flexible will to live, is cold and hot, and it's like temperature regulation is the number one thing you should think about before even water.
Food and water.
Yeah.
Is making sure you're somewhere that you can regulate, or just in a scenario or situation to regulate your temperature.
Just being like the homeostasis of your body is like the most important part of your future now, that if you're in this post-apocalypse surviving world. Like
that's really interesting.
What is my homeostasis? Yeah, how can I keep it?
It's not worth pushing yourself too hard if you're going to be like going out
and then
in the
you're
sun
sweating
and overexhausted and heat stroke,
and you don't want to get too cold.
Frozen.
So the first thing you think about is temperature regulation. And one thing I thought was interesting was that idea of like 45% of your body heat leaves through your head. Like if you're in a cold place, is not true.
Okay, I was like, I don't think that's true.
Yeah, it's not true. What it is that like the way we wear clothes. So any skin exposed will allow like
heat exchange
faster than when there's clothes. But we tend to leave our faces exposed and our heads exposed because of the way our clothes are made. Like our chest is always covered, our arms.
And our body is just designed that like our face is here, so something on your head can be obstructive to that.
Yeah, so it's more like it's more being like, don't panic if you like don't have a hat or something, because it's like you're just getting exposed to elements in the same way you would if like your thigh was exposed.
It's like a percentage, right? And at least we have hair on our heads for the most part. Like,
and like wind obviously robs your body heat, like so it's like stay away from the wind. And then always like sort of like weirdly at this point you kind of have to think about like a fire is like the next thing. And then it's so funny because I was kind of like, they talk about like having fire starters and lighters and shit, and I was like, so you just always have that?
So for warmth or because I'm like, wouldn't water be your next go-to?
Yeah, so they think that like,
but maybe you
true.
need fire to boil water.
Yeah,
like there's depending on your circumstances.
This person said fire is next, and then it is hydration. I guess that is because what are you gonna drink?
Yeah, if you're just like, even when you have a clean water lake, like there can still be contaminants.
Yeah, exactly. So then you have to boil. Like I think that the main idea of drinking water at this point is boiling water. Like you can put leaves in a bag apparently, and then the like transpiration of the water out of the leaves will like go on the bag, and then you can lick the bag. And I was like, that seems like not satiating at all. Like I just hope to God I can get some water to boil.
You probably like every drop counts. Actually.
And it's like, do not worry about food. Like when you first happens, it's temperature regulation, fire, and water, because you won't go crazy from food for like a lot longer.
You can last longer without food.
Yeah. And okay, we had fire starters this weekend, and they were so amazing. And I was like, should I have them on me at all times? There was wax, recycled wood, and oil.
That's what it's made of?
That's what a fire starter is.
Wax, recycled wood, and oil.
Because they feel like they look like the graham crackers we were using to make our s'mores. You put them in the fire, you light them. They light for so long. I love making fires.
They're really flammable.
But it was and I love the feeling. I usually don't use fire starters. I love just like kindling. But then it kind of was like made making a fire so easy. Like it was crazy. Like usually I have a moment of like, oh no, it's not working. And then it works. And it's like, I did it.
Yeah.
Whereas this was like, no,
you can just like start with pretty big sticks.
Yeah, it's crazy. Another thing about fire that this book mentions is how you always need more firewood than you think to always go back out. And like we noticed that this weekend.
Yeah, because we got tiring so much. And then we were like, in my mind, the second day I was like, I bet like we maybe will need more, but we'll just have to have a shorter. The fire will end earlier, but it will look like so much wood.
Yeah, and we went out, and I remember being like, guys, I think we need to all go and get like a bun more to have one tonight. And I think it was kind of like, really? And then by the end of the night, you're like, where'd all the wood go?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It does burn. I love fire so much.
Yeah, Greg's a bit of a pyro. Like, you definitely are obsessed with fire.
I'm obsessed with fire. It's kind of my favorite thing to do. It would be like have a fire, have people around it, and then just like fiddling with the fire while we all talk.
It is very soothing. It's great to look at. It's meditative, and it's a job. It's a task, and I feel like you always. I love a task.
Yeah, and it's like, and the task is to truly burn thing. It's so fun. Also, Vaseline and a cotton ball is apparently an incredible fire starter. Like it'll burn for minutes, not seconds. I was like, that's so
Vaseline's super flammable.
Yeah,
I guess the cotton is.
And it's the oil, and I feel like that would be a smart thing to have on you. Vaseline, maybe.
Okay, like are we carrying these in our pockets? Like,
yeah, and they also like they're like, you gotta have a pocket knife, like these types of things. I mean, I know I'm getting into like prepper territory, which is like kind of like problematic and weird. Yeah. But it's just interesting things to talk about, I guess. And we've just been in the woods. We didn't have a pocket knife. We probably should have. Why?
Because we had other things. Like we had a saw and we had utensils. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. But I mean, I'm sure a pocket knife is very useful, of course.
And there's something like so like,
and it's small.
When someone like has a pocket knife, like, and they like are proud of it, I'm always like, oh, good Lord.
When I was young, I feel like I was given so many.
Me too.
Like, it was always like a gift from like an uncle.
It's like, because they're like, oh, he's a little boy, man. He needs a pocket knife. And you're like,
and it'd be like engraved with my name, and I'd be like, I have no interest in this.
And there'd always be like a toothpick in it, and that's the only thing I would do is like take out the toothpick and like put it in my mouth and be like, I'm not going to use these really
like
bad scissors. Yeah.
Yeah, they're spooky.
Oh my God, I remember when I was in like scouts, there'd always be like the scout that's like been in it for too long who was like such a power trip, and they'd always have these like crazy knives, and they'd like fiddle with them and be like, hey, it's my knife. And now I'm like, that was scary.
Yeah,
like it's like
I didn't go to scouts.
They would like people's knives. People's not. It was like, I'm like, was it straight? Yeah, it was. It was like incel vibes.
You're a gay that did straight things. Like you went to outdoor camp.
I hated scouts.
Went to scouts,
but scouts was
went
gay.
To musical theater.
Yeah. Okay, scouts maybe wasn't as gay as musical theater, but it was like not cool. Like I remember I used to pretend to tie my shoe to duck. Like when I would like get dropped off at scouts, I was like, hope no one sees me walk into this stupid place where we're all like,
wait, but like who would see? Like was it in the middle of Toronto?
No, it was like in my neighborhood, and I was just
like you would just go to a building.
Yeah, but I just was trained. Like one of those things where like I was like,
wait, I thought scouts would be like in the woods.
You would go to like a building to like learn how to tie knots during the week,
like in a gymnasium,
like every Tuesday. Yeah, and then you do weird weird things like. There were like weird like rituals
in the gym
that you would do, and I was like, I hate this. I wish I was in dance class.
Media did not prepare me for that because I always pictured it in the woods.
So
like scouts, you live in the woods.
Go to the woods. Like I will say, like some of the skills from this weekend that I had that came naturally, I'm like, this actually came from scouts because you practice them in a gym and then you go into the woods.
Okay.
And you
little like field trips.
Yeah.
Or
so
like
a thing about body heat. Like I remember going camping really young, and it was like, I don't know, November and really cold, and that's where I learned that like you can't have any of your body touching the ground because the ground sucks all your body heat really quickly.
Meaning like put a layer between you and it?
Yeah, so when we slept camping this weekend, we had these like little, they're truly like 1/2 inch foam pads, and I would sometimes do it when I was hot. I would just put my arm off the pad on the ground and immediately I would like cool down so much. So it's just, as long as you're just, so if that's ever an issue and you're in a cold setting,
right,
you need to be lifted. And like I remember once we were like November camping and we had to like build these weird like stick things to sleep on to like prove
stick things.
They were like, you had to make your own like thermarest and sleep on it.
Oh my God. Sticks?
It was like, they had them all there on a table, but yeah, it was like sticks.
Wouldn't you use like
bark
and pine needles and stuff?
There was pine needles.
Leaves, or is that not, like, is it like
it wasn't leaves?
Not trying to touch the soil? Like, what are we trying
you're literally not trying to touch the ground.
But would it be enough to have just like pile on like forest debris?
I mean, there's something about forest debris that to me that seems really wet and gross. Like these were sticks and like was just what they gave us. Like we didn't have to go look in the woods. So obviously there wasn't in my opinion, they're giving it to us.
Something you told me once that I didn't know about, maybe your parents said this, is like also it's sometimes better to not wear your clothes in your sleeping bag, because if you wore them through the day, there's a lot of moisture in them.
Yeah.
Even if you don't feel wet.
Yeah.
Even if you don't feel like you're perspired, it's like your socks and your pants and your underwear and stuff are moisture, and you're way more likely to get cold and get hypothermia if the temperatures drop a lot.
This book also said that
conditions.
is like true, and they said though that like it's important to know in these settings that you don't force people to get naked and sleep close to each other, because that can create interpersonal like interpersonal uncomfort and stress.
And you're like, and that's like, the book was like so homophobic, and it's like, and then sleeping naked next to each other is wrong.
No, but it could be like men and women,
right?
Like it's the point he was saying was like,
if we're trying to survive as a mini society, like don't want
forcing everyone to get naked together might create like a weird, stressful, creepy environment.
Yeah,
that was an interesting take, because I've heard that before too. It's like everyone's getting naked and sleep, but it's like, if you're not comfortable, don't do that, because then you're gonna like all end up. I don't even know. I don't even really know, but you're like not sleeping, you're stressing out because you're like dick is like on someone's leg. And yeah, like hydration, I think it's like the CDC says you only need to bring clear water to a rolling boil for 1 minute, but most places I saw said 5 minutes, and we did that this weekend too.
Yeah, because our water pump stopped working.
Yeah,
we have to remember that it's not working.
Yeah.
Go get
the water pump's cool. It's like you pump the water right out of the lake into
like with your hand.
Yeah, and essentially there's just a filter that like the size of the particles that can get through the bacteria and that we're worried about in these great like lakes, for example, aren't going to make it through. But like
you're filtering it.
Obviously metals and things from like
poison toxin.
We're just lucky to be in Canada where like these lakes are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And like we're worried about like beaver feces, and like that's not going to get through if it is there.
Right.
And then, like for eating things, eating plants, if you don't know about the plants of your area, is like way more dangerous than, the rule of thumb is like, if it's moving and you kill it and cook it, you can probably eat it.
Got it. You like mean like animal.
Insects,
or a creature.
animals, creatures, like you just cook them, you can eat them. Whereas plants are like way more dangerous if you don't know.
Look similar to other plants, especially like mushrooms, same kind of thing where it's like, don't risk it.
Oh, another reason you're not supposed to worry about food immediately and only be worrying about water is because food, if you get sick or eat something wrong, you're screwed. Yeah, so it's like, why not wait, like allow your body like more and more time. You're buying time essentially to not put something in that's going to make you sick.
I see. Like find the proper food sources. Yeah. I'd always heard like acorns was a thing that's like at least where we live, like nuts and stuff. But I don't want to like promise that. Like
the only thing
I know acorns are like you can like boil them to get rid of their bitter and mash them up. Like that was in a video we made one time.
But like the one thing that I know about is dandelions and pine needles.
Yeah.
So dandelions are always, every aspect of a dandelion is edible, and any alternative looking things that look similar to dandelions are also edible. Okay. So you don't run the risk of like mistaking
grabbing
it.
The wrong plant.
And they have nutrition. They have like calcium and magnesium and vitamin A and C. And pine needles aren't very nutritious. They only have vitamin C, but like making a tea with them and stuff can help like literally like mentally satiate you. Okay. Make it feel like you're eating something. Other than that, it's like that's when it comes into like being like, who's a good leader? Who understands what these plants are? You're probably not going to be alone. Who has actual knowledge that you can trust is like why it goes back to the first point of being the most important thing is social skills. No,
that is the
understanding who you can trust and making the most effective
probably
decisions.
A good rule for life, to be honest. I mean, maybe not, but even like that book that I love, and instantly I'm forgetting the name of it.
The Broken Earth series?
No, sorry. It's like the science book. Oh, God, my brain. Wow. I just did a video based off of it. Sorry, I'm just going to like pause. No, it's from like David Epstein. It's like his second book. Why can't I think of it? Oh, it's like... It's about being a specialist or a generalist.
Oh, yes.
Well, why can't I think of the title right now?
Too.
Anyway, because we are so primed to be in a world where we look at people who are like specialists and who practice these things from their whole life. So the typical story is like Tiger Woods played golf since he was like so young, and that's why he's so good. So you should put all your effort in one basket. But what his argument and studies he's focusing on show like people who have a more diverse set of skills, even when they're unrelated, actually perform better in so many ways. And like I've talked about this a lot here and on videos. It's like Nobel laureates are like 26 times more likely to be musicians or actors or comedians or magicians or painters or electricians or engineers. Like, So having these other skills that are transferable obviously makes you more flexible. And I found that, not to like bring it back to Planet of the Apes, because I know you were like kind of lukewarm on
I was
it.
lukewarm on the second half. Loved the premise.
Yeah, maybe it's because I love the premise so much. The second half is just like an action film.
Yeah.
But I just found it so fascinating to like see a movie that was kind of emulating what human evolution might have looked like at one stage, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you get caught up sometimes and you're like, oh, but they're apes, and obviously apes don't communicate like this. I every now and then I have to stop myself and be like, but
in the movie, they are apes that speak English sometimes. So
yeah, but because there would have been
a
a point where probably like Homo sapiens used primarily grunting and like slowly developed speech.
Yeah,
right. That would have been over hundreds of thousands of years.
Interesting.
And I was like, ooh, this almost is like a snapshot of maybe what Homo sapiens looked like 100,000 years ago.
I see.
Right? Or maybe.
Oh, that's a cool way to look at it. I hadn't
looked
at it like that.
And I kind of thought the whole movie might have been that. And I was like, that. I don't know. It was just cool to be like, what were Homo sapiens like hundreds of thousands of years ago? I know we predict that Homo sapiens
honestly
came out
Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is good.
Yeah,
like now that you're
really
saying that, I'm like, that's an interesting way of looking at it, which I wasn't, and that is true. And I think like honestly, you're right. Like there would have been that sort of in between time, and the way that the apes communicate is like really interesting, even when they're not speaking English.
It's like sign language.
Yeah. It is kind of funny that they
though,
can be like
you could like you're right that they're also speaking English is funny.
Yeah.
But that there would have been this intermediate phase where we were using like animals communicate with body language. Like our own very dog does that, right? Like they snarl, they hit, they coil their tails or whatever. And
it's like, kind of like. In the movie, they like kind of do that thing where like all the mistakes are made by like the dumb men who make mistakes that are in power,
and
right? Like it's like you're putting your trust in someone.
It is about like the human race, and other species like dogs are pack animals, but it is often like a leader. And in this movie, they're highlighting like a leader that can learn to trust and negotiate versus a leader who leads with violence and fear, and which one will outdo. And of course, like there's no like one answer to these things. Like you're saying, in apocalypse, you need someone who's adaptable.
But it's really crazy.
Might call for a different type of leadership.
But it is crazy to think that right now our leaders are all politicians who are like men. Like in general,
we are,
no, in general, like across the world,
general,
there's a rarity of the politicians being women, and it's like interesting that we have such an obvious, like studying us from a bird's eye view. No, let's go further. Studying us from the moon. Callback. Moon's eye view of Earth. It's just a bunch of these people that like you'd look and be like, we know that diversity is better. Like if there was
different types of people,
if there was exactly like if you think about surviving an apocalypse and then looking at the Earth and then being like, okay, they're going through shit. It's like that's a very obvious thing. You should have you should have a complete gender balance of leaders in order to try and get to the best like we have a serious issue. You know what I mean? Because it's like if it's all about
like
who we're in charge of
species, I think like we've only not that recently come out of like kings and queens, like individual rulers. Now we're in a phase of like democracy where we have like this idea of like many different people working together, but it still is like patriarchal. And it's slowly changing, but who knows? And who even knows if like democracy in the long run is the right form of society? Like obviously we live by it because we're like born into one, but who knows in 1,000 years what type of structure humans will live in? But
oh my god, and critical thinking skills. Sometimes I'm just like, wow, we lack that as a.
Well, I always think about how, well, no, I mean, some people have great critical thinking skills. If we're just like, there is a diverse range of humans, and I think that is important for this very reason that we don't know what the future is, right? Like, in the same way that, we look at like people who only care about physical fitness and fighting or being like aggressive, like that is just natural that there'll be some people like that. Like, if we're all just like genius brain critical thinking people, that's like, we're not gonna have the adaptability for a scenario that calls for physical power. You know what I mean? I don't know, like, or don't you think? Like, it's easy to look at, like, we live in a world that is becoming increasingly intellectual, and that's cool. And I enjoy being an intellectual person. Like, I'm not a very like physical person, but as a society, it's like, apart from like the extremes of it, I think it's obviously healthy to have a variety of perspectives, because for the same reason genetically it's better to be diverse so that when a virus hits, it doesn't wipe everyone out. And so like yes, I stand here and like get annoyed at like a lot of conservative viewing points and like even political points, but it's like I understand that this is like a balancing act of like what is right for the human race. I don't know.
Wow. Oh my God. Cool. Okay, well, hopefully we don't ever have to use any of these things.
True.
And it was a really fun time camping, pumping our water, having fires, and playing with these ideas while never having to ever really worry. And then getting back into our car and driving back to Toronto and just being like, hey, what's up, everyone?
Great, let's go party.
Like, oh my God, let's like, what happened in the world? But it is cool to get away. And I think that's what sparked this idea, was just being like, just living off of sort of the bare minimum for like even 3 days.
And it is a nice way to connect.
Really
like
nice.
We obviously come with food and come prepared, but it's like nice to just like be in nature.
All you do is just like live in nature and like hang out with truly chipmunks who are like pushing pine cones off trees and eating them, and you're like, that's super so cool.
Cute. Yeah, that's something that's interesting about the movie. One more time, last thing I'm going to say about it is they bring it up. It's like every other animal is self-sufficient except humans like rely on power. And I don't mean like structural power. They're like trying to get generator power.
Yeah, so they can communicate.
Because they feel like they can't function without this like electrical
power.
I
loved that when we were camping, like this chipmunk like pushing pine needles out of the tree,
so
eating
cute.
it.
Would push like 5 down and then come down and get them on the ground and eat them.
And then there was sort of just like a heron across the lake, just like eating fish, and then like these mice just sort of like running around. And it's like, when we're not here, this is all still happening, and it's so adorable and like humbling and like interesting to just be like, they're like looking at us like, okay, weird.
But it calls back to the point of what makes humans so unique is that we function as group animals.
But it was great to watch them just like do their like thing, and they were so cute. Okay, well, thanks for listening. We are going to talk even more about apocalypses because it's on our mind, as it might be on everyone's, because everyone's kind of talking about like that now. A lot of people are just accepting that we're like, things are going to get worse, and so we're going to use science to talk about it because it might.
And it might not. And lots of things are good.
Okay. Yeah, things are good.
I think it's important. Maybe we should do an episode on like something like all the good things.
Yeah.
Like we live in a time where there's lots of good things as well.
Okay.
And it's like can be depressing to only think of the bad ones.
Okay, also
Bye.